In my opinion, this is a problem that's troubled vendors since the very inception of jointly funded activities with resellers. A suspicion still exists that MDF or marketing development funds are often just written to the bottom line, or that the funds are used to promote the reseller's business rather than the vendor's product. Well, in my opinion, MDF funds can be used to the satisfaction of both parties, but for this to occur, it's important to understand the following. Firstly, all but the very largest resellers will have severely limited marketing capabilities. The vast majority of UK resellers are small businesses where the principal has a sales or technical background. Generally, these resellers do not employ marketing specialists and are too busy running their businesses to take on this task themselves. Therefore, they require extensive physical support from vendors if they're to run successful activities. And it's often this lack of physical resource that is a greater constraint than the lack of financial resource. So the simple provision of marketing materials or funds will not necessarily encourage them to undertake activities. Secondly, the majority of resellers do not employ systems to monitor the effectiveness of marketing activities. So obtaining feedback from the reseller on the relative success of the activity will prove to be virtually impossible. It does not mean that all activities will be unsuccessful, but only subjective feedback is available to provide a judgment. Thirdly, resellers will be keen to associate their brand with that of the vendor, and in fact this can sometimes be more appealing than the availability of joint funding. So vendor brand guidelines need to be sufficiently flexible to facilitate this. If not, the concept of joint marketing is significantly compromised. Fourthly, larger resellers will try to fit vendor promotion into existing marketing vehicles, for example catalogue mailings or website advertising. Specific vendor features tend to be lost among those of other vendors, so these activities are generally ineffective. Resellers will have a rate card pricing for these activities, and they're viewed as profit centres in their own right, regardless of the sales resulting. Consequently, larger resellers lead with these activities in preference to undertaking something bespoke. I think MDF can almost always be better spent. A fifth consideration is that generally all a reseller can offer in return for funding is access to their customer database. This can often be segmented by product, purchase history, etc., so it can be very, very powerful. However, resellers are extremely reluctant to provide customer data directly to the vendor for marketing activities as a result of the fear that vendors will go direct. And finally, the eternal argument of whether the vendor or the reseller owns the customer is unavoidable if the reseller undertakes the activity, even if it's entirely funded by the vendor. It should be assumed that the relationship will continue to be owned by the reseller. If these issues are to be overcome, it is necessary for vendors to completely rethink their approach to joint marketing activity with the channel. I think the only reliable way to maximise the return to the vendor from MDF expenditure is for them to control the activities directly, either in-house or via third-party agencies. And no expenditure should be sanctioned by the vendor unless it's for an approved activity and or via an approved agency. The vendor should establish templated activities to control the messaging and branding requirements. The agency can then customise these for each participating reseller to include their specific value-added text and imagery such as logos, etc. Additionally, the agency will need to be prepared to do everything for the reseller if the activity is to be approved. NDAs can be signed between the agency and the resellers, and this often overcomes the issue of access to reseller customer databases for implementing mailings, telemarketing activities, etc. Also, smaller resellers tend to appreciate this approach, as it gives them access to marketing expertise and the framework to implement activities. It takes the burden of campaign delivery away from them. They simply receive the quality inquiries resulting from the activity, which they can feed into their sales process. All inquiries from MDF funded activities should be received centrally and followed up using the process described in the previous Integrated Results Opinion webcast. So as centrally controlled marketing budgets get tighter, MDF represents a potentially powerful means of funding end-user promotional activities. In my opinion, it is imperative, however, that the overall objectives are set for this expenditure and that it is tightly controlled.